Hello everyone. Today we're diving into the life of Erik Erickson. He was a psychologist who completely changed pretty much how we think about human growth and identity. He believed that every stage of life, from being a baby to being elderly, teaches us something important about who we are. This is pretty much the overview of what we'll be going over today. I'm gonna walk you through his early life, his education, his major discoveries, his famous 8-stage theory, and his lasting impact, and we'll see why he's considered one of the greats in psychology as well. So it all started in 1902. He was born in Frankfurt, Germany. His childhood was tough. He never did meet his biological father, and he looked very different from his stepfather. He was born to a Jewish mother and a Nordic father, I believe, and because of that, he often felt like he didn't belong. And this personal struggle helped him inspire his research later on in life, especially his interest in identity. And then we know in 1914, 1918, World War I did take place. And we know that Germany did lose in World War I, which is where he grew up. So that could have also played an effect on his childhood and adolescence. And he initially did not take an interest to psychology. He knew that after graduating high school, he liked art. So he thought that he'd move to Italy to pursue his artistic passions. Unfortunately, though, that did not work out. I don't know if no one was buying his art, but he had to move back home. And that's he started tutoring for some families. And through networking, someone introduces him to Sigmund Freud and his daughter, Anna Freud. And I believe Anna Freud, she believed that Erik Erickson might be a good fit for taking interest in psychology, or that he would be good at it. So she convinces him to go to school back at Italy. And so he enrolls over there and he starts studying child analysis at the Vienna Psychoanalytic Institute. I believe he's 25 at this time. And then a significant world event is in 1929, the US stock market crashes. Even though it wasn't in Europe, it affected globally the economic and employment everywhere around the world. And then in 1930, Erickson, he marries Joan Surson. She was a Canadian dancer, and she becomes his lifelong partner in both love and work. They did have a strong teamwork dynamic. She helped him refine his theories and write his books, and they stayed together until they died. And then in 1933, he receives his diplomas from the Psychoanalytic Institute in Vienna and also from Montessori School. And then in 1933, we know Nazi Germany is spreading rapidly throughout Europe, so he attempts to flee to Copenhagen, Denmark, but he was not able to attain citizenship there. And so his wife, and his family, they go to the US to seek refuge. And then in 1933, that same year, he immediately, luckily, finds a job at the Massachusetts General Hospital as well as Harvard Medical School. So he's teaching and he's a professor over there. And then shortly after, I believe he goes to Yale as well. And then in 1938, he leaves Yale to study with the Sioux tribe in South Dakota and the Yurok tribe in California. Along with indigenous communities, he also worked with children, World War II veterans, pretty much a diverse group of people. So this array of demographics and wanting to see how different life experiences affected people's development, we can see this through his work as well. And then he also noticed that our growth isn't just shaped by what's inside of us, but also by our culture, family, and environment. And through the indigenous tribes on the West Coast, he was able to see these differences in their communities. And then he stays on the West Coast. He goes to actually Berkeley. He does a study over there. And then throughout the 40s, he opened a private practice in San Francisco and is working also in child analysis over there. And then another significant world event is that in 1945, the U.S. dropped bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, putting an end to World War II. And then in 1950, Erickson published his most famous book, Childhood and Society. In this book, he introduced the idea of an identity crisis. And this is the stage when you're pretty much trying to figure out who you are and what you are and where you kind of fit in your community. And he showed us how childhood experiences, culture, and society all work together to shape our personality, essentially. And this would later on become one of his most influential books in psychology. So this is the theory of psychosocial development that he pretty much mentions in the book as well. It characterizes 8 different stages of personality, and in each phase a person must face a certain conflict, and the result is an achievement of a skill or a quality that is attained. And before we get into it, we're going to look at some of the differences between him and Freud. They're kind of similar developmental theories, yet Freud, his kind of looked at the abnormal negative aspects, and then whereas Erickson's was a more positive take on it. Freud, it revolved around a lot of tension and pleasure, whereas Erickson's work was more rooted in social orientations and goal acquisition at each stage. And it also transcended not just at where Freud was only from infancy to adolescence, Erickson's examined social experiences across the entire lifespan. So here's just another photo of each stage. It starts off at infancy, and this is where you learn to trust others, and then it goes on to the toddler stage. Every single picture will have a different age range, just because everyone will attain it at a different age. It's not really specific, but it's around these ages of 0 to 2 or 0 to 1. And then so going on to early childhood, around 2 to 4, the goal that is attained is will, where it says autonomy versus shame and doubt. This is where children learn independence. And then in preschool from 4 to 5 years old, this is where children learn to start taking initiative on their own. And then in school age from 5 to 12, this is where they really develop the skills and confidence. And then around adolescence from 13 to 19, this is the identity part where they figure out who they are. And then throughout young adulthood, they start looking at building close relationships, whether platonic or romantic. It's just building lifelong relationships with the people around you. And then in middle adulthood, from around 40 to 65 years old, the goal that is to be attained is contributing to society and helping others. And then in late adulthood, from 65 years all the way up until death, you're reflecting on your life, either with peace or regret, and making amends and pretty much satisfied with the life that you have lived. Erickson believed that successfully handling each of these stages helps us build a strong and healthy identity. Erickson also studied how culture affects development. And we see also that he taught at the Austin Riggs Center throughout the 50s. And this is where he treated Norman Rockwell when he was, I think, a child or an adolescent here. And then he also befriended him as well outside of work. In 1954, the civil rights movement took place. And then I believe this is similar. It was a similar experience from when he was a Jewish boy in Germany, or a man, I guess, and he had to leave because of persecution. He might have been able to see a similarity to the new country, the United States, that he moved to, seeing the persecution going on throughout the 50s as well with African Americans. And then from 1960 throughout 1970, he returned to Harvard as a professor in human development. And then in 1970, he officially retires from the professional circle. And then in 1968, we see that Martin Luther King Jr., he's assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. And I believe this inspired one of his most famous books that he wrote about Gandhi, actually, another civil rights activist. So in 1970, he receives the Pulitzer Prize for his psychobiography, Gandhi's Truth on the Origins of Non-Militant Violence. And then he also received the National Book Award for this work. The New York Times, they considered it pretty much from Freud. It was different because from Freud, they believe that the personality, it takes its final shape during infancy, whereas Erickson, he pretty much shares how not just infancy, but also throughout till the point that you die, that the role of culture does shape identity. And then in 1994, he passes away in Massachusetts. And then also another legacy that he has, even today, counselors, teachers, and psychologists use these stages to help people understand their own personal growth. The biggest takeaway from Erik Erickson is that development never stops. No matter your age, every stage of life brings new opportunities to grow, discover yourself, and shape your identity. These are some links that helped me with this video, and then thank you guys so much for listening.